there's some confusion here. I think there's a real asymmetry between science and religion that shouldn't go unobserved. And there's an effort on the part of David and Bradley to not own the very clear propositional claims that have been made by every religion for millennia. Claims about the way the universe is structured. Very explicit claims about what's going to happen in the future, about what happened in the past, about what happens after death. And these claims are incompatible. So, for instance, if Buddhism is true, Buddhism purports to be true. Buddhism has a doctrine of karma and rebirth. You can be reborn as an animal. You can be reborn in various realms. If Buddhism is true, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are absolutely false in their core claims. I mean, these are not pictures that can be squared logically. And every religion is in the business of making these claims about the afterlife and about all manner of other things. And the crucial difference between religion and science is that every religion is beholden to its literature and doesn't think, for the most part, apart from the fringe of kind of liberal intelligentsia, for the most part, people don't think it's man-made. They don't think that these are just books. If everyone read the Bible like Shakespeare, Hitch and I would be doing something entirely unrecognizable right now. I mean, there would be no problem. And so the problem we're articulating is everyone has this idea that they have knowledge about the afterlife, the end of days, the virgin birth of certain people, etc. And these are claims to truth, and they are profoundly anti-scientific because you can't edit the books. You can't edit the Quran. You can't edit the Bible. You can't acknowledge freely within the context of the faith that there are just mountains of life-destroying nonsense in these books, and that's a problem.
Well, so where do we get our morals from? It can't be from the Bible, because almost nobody obeys, certainly not the Old Testament, and most of the New Testament. I mean, death penalty for adultery, there goes half of Congress. I mean, nobody is going to do this, right? So we pick and choose, we cherry pick from the holy books based on something else that's happened that I referenced in my opening statement of there's been this other change that's happened, this secularization of morality. That is, you have to actually have good reasons for why you hold certain moral principles, and you should be able to articulate them. And so that's been the change there. So even if you and I both listen to the still small voice within to decide what's right or wrong, Dinesh, I'm claiming you're not getting it from the Bible, and I'm not either. We're getting it from somewhere else. I think we've evolved this propensity to have moral emotions, and then culture tweaks them, and we've been getting progressively more moral.
But what's telling us what is actually right or wrong?
But I think science does tell us what's right and wrong.
Sorry, Lawrence Krauss.
I think science does tell us what's right and wrong in a real way.
Really?
We have learned, for example, the scientific facts that certain animals can suffer, for example, affects our decision of how we should treat those animals, whether we should eat them or not eat them, or the scientific evidence that certain people of certain colors don't have different intellects, different capabilities, has changed the way we deal with other humans.
But at bottom,
science has determined the way we behave in the modern world.
And science is telling us what's right or wrong.
Yeah, I think so, because it's telling us how the world actually works.
Ian Hutchinson.
Oh, by the way, what happens after we die? Well, where were you before you were born? Okay, so the fact that I don't know for sure, it does not mean that the theory that there is an afterlife is equal to the theory that there is no afterlife. All the preponderance of evidence is that nothing happens, anything more than like where you were before you were born. So the default, the null hypothesis in science, which we always begin with, your hypothesis is not true until proven otherwise, we have to assume there is no afterlife until there's some evidence to the contrary. Accepted, testable, replicable, and so forth. So in that sense, I think we can make a distinction, say, between, even though we can make a distinction between being an atheist, I just don't believe in God, and an agnostic, that it's not provable, or as Stephen Colbert told me when I was trying to explain the difference, agnostics are just atheists without balls, right? It's true, nobody's an agnostic behaviorally. It's just sort of a technical question on the ontological question of God's existence. But in fact, we do make choices about how we act in the world. And having a scientific worldview, I think, is a better perspective on the world than having a religious worldview. Thank you. First of all, in the word itself, near death. They're not dead. They're near dead. There's a very big difference there. And you can replicate these in the lab. You can put on Michael Persiger's God helmet that bombards the temporal lobes with electromagnetic fields, and people have out-of-body near-death experiences right there in his room. You can do it through oxygen deprivation by accelerating people in a centrifuge. These are pilots. Over half of them, when they accelerate up to where they pass out, they have out-of-body near-death experiences. They see the light at the end of the tunnel. They go through the tunnel and so on. You can see the videotape. They're just sitting there drooling. They're out. And of course, you can do this through sleep deprivation, through extreme environments. Arctic climbers, Arctic explorers, mountain climbers, solo sailors have these kinds of out-of-body near-death sense presence experiences under extreme environmental conditions. So those three lines of evidence tell us it's in the brain, not outside. That is, would you lose your morality? Would you? Would you give it up? Would you lose your sense of right and wrong? Would you just be adrift without a rudder? Would you turn to a life of crime and sin? If your answer is no, of course not, I would still love my family, I would respect my friends, I would honor my word and my commitments, and I would obey the law, then you've just assented to my position that you don't need God to be good. If your answer is yes, without God I would hate my family, cheat on my friends, dishonor my word, and disobey the law, then you've just revealed something deeply disturbing about your moral character. In other words, if you lack morals, it's because you lack empathy and character, not God and religion. So let's ask ourselves, what makes something right or wrong? Now, Dr. Turek has just presented the position that's roughly called the divine command theory, or what I call the ask God principle. And the problem is that if God does not decree something immoral, does that make it moral? The seventh commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. If God had not included that in the Ten Commandments, would that make adultery moral or acceptable? If you're not sure about this, ask your partner. They'll let you know. It's the first part of my answer. Thou shalt not rape is not even in the Bible. In fact, quite the contrary. Yahweh orders his warlords to rape all they want. That's one of the benefits of being a warlord if you win. This is in the Old Testament in many places. In any case, how are we to know God's moral commands? Well, we have a book. Well, if you read the book as a moral guidebook, does that mean we should condemn gay marriage and condone slavery? That's what it says we're supposed to do. I doubt anybody here would condone slavery, although I suspect a good number of you are still against gay marriage. But you won't be for long. Within 5 to 10 years, you will all be in favor of same-sex marriage. And you all say, I got that from my religion. God loves everybody and so on. But you're not saying that now. This is an example, contrary to Dr. Turek's, that, in fact, we do change our moral values over time. We shift them according to the changing moral zeitgeist.
I write books about what's going on in the Muslim world because I have an expertise in what's going on in the Muslim world. I actually travel through the Muslim world. I study the Muslim world. I understand the conversations that are taking place. And so I feel like, in a sense, I'm in a better position to sort of make judgments about what sort of socio or religious or political developments are taking place within this people of 1.5 billion a number. Statements like there are millions of Muslims who have this sort of death cult are profoundly inaccurate and are based on nothing except your sort of general impression of a region and of a religion that you have a very surface understanding of.
Well, it's not. For instance, in the End of Faith, I cite these Pew polls that were done in 9 Muslim countries, actually not the most radicalized. And the most radicalized countries wouldn't let the polling be done. But even in Turkey, the Muslim success story on many fronts, the level of support for suicide bombing against non-combatants in defense of the faith was shocking. I mean, you just run the numbers. When 77% of people in Lebanon say that it is justified, that's, it's not a minority. It's not even close to a minority. Even if it were only 5% of the Muslim world that was radicalized by my lights, that is still a problem we have to talk about soberly. I mean, we're talking about 75 million people.
Certainly, and I don't think anybody would say that that's not a conversation that we need to talk about. But it's a civilizational problem that is not amenable to simply saying that Islam is a religion of peace. I don't understand what Islamic civilization means. I mean, I don't.
I'm talking about this global civilization.
Oh, I see. I think
Now, analogously, now this is another step, and it may be a bridge too far for you, that there could be things that are not in the material world. I don't know how else to define it, and I'm not talking, maybe it's a consciousness piece, maybe it's a God piece, a spirit piece, an angel piece. Every religion has its incarnations, pardon the bad analogy, but the non-physical elements. And the claim would be that those are not subject to the scientific approach. Impossible that science to do. So maybe that theology can apprehend those things through human understanding, just like human understanding can apprehend good art. Maybe that's an analogy.
Or maybe not theology, maybe cuisine or finger painting. That might apprehend these extra non-scientific truths.
Okay.
What I'm saying is finger painting and cuisine are two other human endeavors. They don't claim to be getting at the truth, but they're pretty cool in their own ways. And I want to know how theology aims at the truth without following in the footsteps of science.
Okay, now that is, again, that's good progress, because now we're saying, okay, given that you may be able to do this conceptually, we can't say you can't. What are the methods, or what are your techniques to get at that?
Exactly.
And I would say that there are 2 general categories they would use. They would use so-called natural theology, which for a long time was used, and then into disrepute during the 20th century, early part, and it seems to have emerged in some quarters more recently with arguments from design that you can look from the natural world and infer elements of particularly in cosmology, not biology anymore because of Darwin, because of you.
So you want to look at the anthropic principle?
Something like that. That's category 1. That's the natural theology. The other is revealed theology. Everybody has their revelations, and those are the 2 methodologies, right?
That's it.
Okay.
I'm glad to know there isn't a third that I've overlooked, because I have at least a little familiarity with those. And I don't know how to distinguish. Let's take revealed theology. I don't know how to distinguish that from what we might call auto-anthropology.
Which means?
Well, it's anthropology you do on yourself.
Okay.
You are your own informant.
Okay.
So just the way the anthropologist goes off to some remote island where the people live and does his or her darndest to be sympathetic and to get into their world and find out what makes them tick and ask them lots of questions and find out. And comes back to us with tales of river gods and evil spells and incantations that help the harvest and all sorts of other stuff, including a lot of genuine knowledge about medicinal plants and the weather and who knows what else. But all right, so that's anthropology. Auto-anthropology is you do the same thing to yourself. And you treat yourself as a native informant and find that you got all these fantastical ideas in your head and you try to make sense of them. And fine. Auto-anthropology is a doable enterprise, and the result is, in principle, as interesting as the result of any anthropology. Isn't it curious that a person, an early 21st century person living in Cleveland would have this set of beliefs and convictions and ideas. Yeah, pretty neat. But now we want to know, should we believe any of it? Should we take any of it any more seriously than we take the river god of those people on that island? That's the scientific question, and I don't know whether the theologians want to even address it.
All right, let's go to natural theology.
Well, natural theology just seems to be an attempt, since Hume and his wonderful dialogues on concerning natural religion, to find scientific evidence, naturalistic evidence for the existence of a deity. And I don't think there's been much improvement on the theology since Hume. I am an admirer of Hume's dialogues concerning natural religion, perhaps my favorite philosophical text of all time.
How do you then account for the seemingly increase in the last couple of decades after natural theology almost having disappeared because of Hume and others? Sort of a resurrection, pardon the expression.
Well, I don't know. No, I simply, I think that as we once, well, I have an idea, but I say I don't know. We've seen a change in job description for God. We had God the artificer, making all creatures great and small. Then we had God who sets up the initial conditions and then lets natural selection take care of it. So this is God the lawgiver. Now we're beginning to think, well, maybe you don't even need God to give the laws, because maybe all possible sets of laws are, as it were, given somewhere. And so God is not even formulating the laws, just God is just sort of choosing the laws wherever we are. But you don't even need God the law chooser. So we're left with God, the master of ceremonies. Nothing else to do. But we still want to believe in God. And, but I don't, at this point, I don't. I mean, I don't need a God who plays air guitar. If God is God better do something. I'd have a job description. And I don't see it anymore, but I think the quest for a suitable job description for God is what explains the rise of natural theology.
The ancient philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote in his Pensées, "The heart has reason in which reason does not know. We know this in countless ways." What would you say to people who try to lead a good and just life by through their religion and by following what is in their hearts, rather than following the literal sayings of the Bible and following reasoning?
Yeah, well, I certainly don't mean to diminish experience that has nothing to do with coming to a rational understanding of the way the world works. I mean, much of our experience is not a matter of reason. It's not a matter of belief even, and some of the most important aspects of our experience aren't. So experiencing love and devotion and awe, I mean, these are features of our subjectivity that I think are extraordinarily valuable. The important thing to recognize is that if you think the only real container, the only viable container for those experiences is your denominational church, is the language of your ancestors, you know, if you're still committed to being a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew, I think you are tacitly supporting the religious divisions in our world. I mean, you are giving cover, I think, quite explicitly to all of the people who take their holy books far more seriously. I mean, I can't tell you how much time I and other people have spent having to fight the battle against the liberals and moderate Christians and Jews and Muslims who will insist upon the viability of these denominations and of raising their children to think that they're Christians and Muslims and Jews, and who will never admit that any of the extremist behavior going on in the name of their faith has anything to do with religion. And so there's no question in my mind that it provides a kind of friction in our discourse where we really can't call a spade and say, okay, this is much of the Bible and the Quran is just life-destroying gibberish, and we just have to acknowledge this and cease to take these books seriously.
So here's what happened. About 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, these small bands of hunter-gatherers began to coalesce into chiefdoms and states. As long as the numbers are small, informal means of behavior control and moral enforcement operate quite well. As soon as the numbers are too large for these informal means, shunning, making people feel guilty, gossiping about them, making them feel embarrassed for their bad behavior, as soon as the populations are big, there's too much opportunity for free riding and for cheating the system and taking advantage of it and getting away with it. So two institutions evolved: government, to set up a set of rules and everybody gets a copy, and religion, in case you think you got away with it, you didn't, because there's an eye in the sky that knows all and sees all and keeps track of this. So this is the second part of how humans construct religions and gods, because we need it for moral enforcement. It just so happens, by contingency and chance, religion and government was the first on the scene. Now, what's happened in the last several centuries since the Enlightenment, in addition to the trajectory that Professor Krauss outlined for you, science displacing religion as the primary means of explaining how the world works, something else has also happened. We've slowly but ineluctably replaced religion as the primary source of our morals and came up with the clever idea that you actually have to have a reason why you have certain moral principles, and we're going to write certain laws. You actually have to give evidence for why you think this is a good law or a bad law or a good moral principle or a bad moral principle. And that has been the trajectory of the Enlightenment since about 200 years ago. And so again, what's more likely, that one of them happens to be the one true religion and the one true God, and all those others that have been constructed are false gods, or that, as we can clearly see, anthropologically, socially, psychologically, and so on, this is what people do to get along. They construct religions, they construct moral systems, and so on. We now know that we can do this without gods. In fact, we do it quite well without gods. Northern European countries do just fine with much lower rates of religiosity than we have. It is possible to do that, and that is what we've been doing. Now, I want to finish with just one comment on the resurrection, since Ian brought that up. Let me just, leaving aside the scientific evidence for this, just think about what it is that is being said here. God, they are monotheists. They believe that there's just one God, and that Jesus is God manifest on earth, and he is your Savior, and you accept him for redeeming us for sins we never committed. Somebody else in the past committed them. So as I understand this, God sacrifices himself to save us from himself.
It's perfectly clear to me that my style of conversation is not what can be broadcast to the Muslim world to change people's minds. I mean, that is your job. You are much better suited for that job. And I would agree with you that in order to empower the moderates of the Muslim world, drawing cartoons of the Prophet and writing paragraphs of the sort I've written is not a strategy. I'm not a diplomat. And I don't know, but what's troubling me is I don't know where the line is between encouraging moderation, representing what Islam could be. You know, Islam could be a religion of peace, perhaps. Jihad could be just an inner spiritual struggle and have nothing to do with holy war. Indeed, that we have to raise a generation of Muslims who believe those things. But pretending that it is already is problematic, because it isn't for so many millions of Muslims. And it may be that if you pretend hard enough, in fact, you become what you pretend to be. And maybe that's part of the process. But I think we have to admit to ourselves that we are confronting the behavior of a death cult among millions and millions of Muslims, not 10,000 who went to training camps in Afghanistan. We are confronting an endorsement of this kind of behavior and a reflexive political solidarity where Muslims side with other Muslims, no matter how sociopathic their behavior, simply because they're other Muslims. We can't deny the problem while trying to encourage a more benign face of the religion.
Dan, I have to admit I've been more interested in life in theology than in religion in terms of the reality, is there a God, as opposed to the sociology of how this concept has been institutionalized. But we have to face facts that religion is an extremely important part of the way people think about this world. How can we begin to think about religion? Let's start with a definition. How would you define a religion?
Well, I define religion as belief in a supernatural agent or agents whose approval is to be sought. Now, once I've defined religion, then there are some things which look like they're religions that don't meet the definition. Okay, so they're former religions, or they're pseudo-religions, or honorary religions. I don't care particularly about the definition. Seems to me to capture the most important thing, that is the belief in a supernatural agent, and a good one. That distinguishes it from simple superstition, for instance. If we understand that as what religion is, then the question of whether God exists, whether such a supernatural agent exists, is actually, I think, of less importance than to the modern world than maybe it once was. There's lots of arguments for and against the existence of God. I don't know many people who care about those arguments, even who know them. Right? I don't think it convinces anybody. And people say, that's not what's important. Okay, what's important? What's important is not the theology, but the institutions and the loyalty and the tremendous sense of love and allegiance that people have.
And the claim that it improves our lives and our families and our way of our well-being and all of those things. Yeah. All right, so there are a lot of counter-arguments to that too, all the bad things that religions have done, but some people would say that on the whole it's better rather than worse. But rather
and I'm
than...
not necessarily one of those. I think the jury's out on that. I'm simply agnostic about whether religions have done more harm than good, and will continue to do more good than harm, or harm than good.
But what you would like us to do is to subject the religion to some analysis so that we can understand both its origin, its current situation, and maybe predicting where it would come if we really understand it. So
exactly.
So let's make some progress on this. If we're going to do this, and I think that's a legitimate exercise, no matter what your fundamental belief should be, I mean, it should be subjected to these kinds of analyses. What are some of the methodologies that we should begin to think about looking at a study of religion?
Well, I think we have to think not just historically, but biologically. We have to realize that Homo sapiens, us, we descended from earlier hominids. We share a common ancestor with a chimpanzee going back about 6 million years. A lot has changed. And as Darcy Thompson once said, everything is the way it is because it got that way. So let's look at the history as best we can. We have to do a lot of extrapolation and some speculation and see what religion adds to the mix that makes us so different from all other animals. And I think we can do that. I think we can see both what its origins were in superstition, which grew out of an overactive adoption of the intentional stance. When it's something, and this, by the way, is a mammalian feature we share with say, dogs. If your dog hears the thud of snow falling off the roof and jumps up and barks, the dog is in effect asking who's there. Not what's that, but who. It's assuming there's an agent, might be a dangerous agent out there. This assumption that when something surprising, unexpected, puzzling happens, to treat it as an agent until you learn otherwise.
That's the intentional stance.
That's the intentional stance, and it's an instinct. Not just in us.
And it's an appropriate one.
It's an entirely appropriate instinct.
I don't want to get eaten if I'm running around on the plains.
It's on a hair trigger.
Yeah.
And so
it has to happen instantly or it's not going to work.
That's right. You don't want to wait around. If you want to fire, have a lot of false positives, a lot of false alarms.
Right.
Now, in the dog just goes back to sleep. after a minute. But we, because we've got language, we mull it over in our heads, and pretty soon we've conjured up a hallucinated agent, a little forest god or a talking tree or an elf or something. Well, what made that noise? Now, mostly those are just harmless little quirks that we have in our heads, and we soon forget them. Every now and then, one comes along which has a little bit more staying power. It's sort of unforgettable. And so it grows, and we share it with a neighbor. And the neighbor says, "What do you mean? A talking tree? No, there's no talking trees." You say, I could have sworn that tree was talking. Pretty soon the whole village is talking about the talking tree. Maybe they're all saying, "It's crazy, no such thing as a talking tree." But they're all talking about the talking tree. The talking tree idea has entered the world. It has made multiple copies. Everybody in the village has a copy of the talking tree idea. What's it for? It's for itself. It just happened because it could. It's like a virus.
And it may be from time to time that one of these little quirks gets randomly reinforced by, I don't know, a good fishing catch or some animal, and then suddenly the good result is like an operant condition back to that little quirk, and it gets expanded.
In fact, B.F. Skinner did some experiments with pigeons on just that, randomly reinforcing them, and pretty soon they were doing quite elaborate little dances. And sure, this isn't religion. This is just superstition. And it melds perfectly in with their lore, their physical lore, their natural lore. But sometimes they get the idea, well, if you say a little prayer to the talking tree before you go hunting, then you do a little better on the hunt. And so it goes. And the line between good lore, I mean true, accurate lore about where the food is and so forth, and the sort of embellishment is, they don't draw it. They don't think of it as a religion. And gradually these ideas, which naturally infiltrate into their community and get copies in all the heads locally, they sort themselves out. There's competition. There's only so much room in people's heads for these things. And the ones that are unforgettable, the ones that really are catchy, will get copied and passed on and passed on and passed on.
These are the memes.
Those are what Richard Dawkins would call memes. That's right. They're cultural items that reproduce in people's brains.
And their only purpose is their own propagation?
What are they for? They're for themselves. It's like when I first started studying religion, people said, "Oh, an evolutionary account of religion. What do you think religions are good for, Dan?" They got to be good for something. After all, every human group that's ever been studied has some kind of religion. And I said, well, yeah, every group that's ever been studied has the common cold, too. What's it good for? It's good for itself. And these ideas are just good for themselves. They're good at reproducing in minds. Whether they're good habits or bad habits of mind, they're good at reproducing in minds.
Now, for me, the most important part of the Constitution is not the First Amendment. The First Amendment is interesting. Free exercise, no establishment. But for me, the real core of religious freedom was set out in the body of the Constitution itself when it talked about no religious test. And that's the one that today is being violated more than any other constitution. Today we have religious tests for office. It is inconceivable that an atheist, an agnostic, a skeptic could run for office. And that is one of the great tragedies of our political system today. Both parties are equally at fault. Both parties. If you watch that debate with Democrats about religion, it was revolting. It was just Jefferson was turning over in his grave as each Democratic candidate just climbed on each other, trying to pander more and more and more. Oh, Jesus, help me during my times of crisis. And let me tell you, some people think I'm really a Muslim. Barack Obama says, let me tell you, I found Jesus, and this is how I found him, and this is how important it is in my life. I don't want to know that. It is extremely distracting. Not a political event here today. I came I'm very proud of Hillary for about the first 30 seconds of her answer to the question. She said, as a Methodist, we learned that it's important not to wear religion on your sleeve. Stop, please, stop. But Let me tell you how important Jesus was in helping me when I was having trouble with my husband. And Barack and all the rest of it. But the best thing that happened to the separation of church and state in a long time happened this week. And that is the endorsement by Pat Robertson of Rule 2. If that didn't put an end to anybody who really thinks that church and state should be kept together, I don't know what would. I mean, here are two people who represent the most polar extremes. Here you have a man who is famous and running for president only because of 9/11, Rudy Giuliani, and he's getting the endorsement of a man who said that 9/11 was caused by Americans who support gay rights. And the idea of these two people crawling into the same bed politically is, to me, the most revealing demonstration of the misuse of politics. Of course, Pat Robertson, I don't know whether he's a Christian. Pat Robertson's Jesus packs heat, demands tax reduction that benefit the rich, hates immigrants. I mean, the idea that Pat Robertson's Jesus bears any resemblance to the Jesus of the New Testament is just incredible to me, and how his followers, the followers of the religious right, can see any resemblance between a wonderful man. Jefferson, as I say, loved Jesus. He hated St. Paul. He said St. Paul changed a religion by Jesus into a religion about Christ and distorted totally what Jesus was preaching. But what Pat Robertson and what the late Jerry Falwell were doing is so much worse. They've turned Jesus into this kind of this grotesque stereotype of a right-wing ideologue who has nothing to do with religion. And the endorsement really made that clearer than anything could possibly have done. So thank you, Pat Robertson. Thank you, Rudy Giuliani, for making it clear to everybody what many of us in this room have long understood. And the other point that I think we have to make is that the framers, it's so important we understand this, the framers not only gave us freedom of religion, but freedom from religion. That was so important to Jefferson. When Jefferson died, Jefferson micromanaged everything in his life, including the tomb that was going to, the stone that would represent his life. And he insisted on putting only 3 things on his tombstone: not the presidency of the United States, but the fact that he wrote the Declaration of Independence, which he said on the 50th anniversary, just before he died, was designed to free us from monkish ignorance and the control by the churches on the freedom of individuals. It was a Declaration of Independence not only from England, but from European clerical influences. The second thing that he put on it is the Act for Religious Freedom, which is the first act ever in the history of the world to protect not only religion, but non-religion. It was the first act ever to protect atheism and agnosticism at a time when there were hardly any atheists in America. And the third thing he was most proud of was creating the first secular university in the world, the University of Virginia, which by internal statute, the library had to be higher than the church. This reason was going to be more than religion. And these are the things that Jefferson wanted to be remembered for. Freedom from religion is so important. Now I'm going to end with one word of concern. One word of concern. I think it is very important that we not try to create a church of secularism. That we not try to do to them what they have done to us. And that we not try to get secularism to become the established church of the United States or any particular state. I think we have to understand our status as secularists. I think we will always be, in the United States of America, dissenters. We will always be people who challenge authority. We are always going to be the ones who demand total freedom of inquiry. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. I think sometimes it's better to be in the minority than to be in the majority. I don't fear that we will ever, at least in our lifetimes, be in the majority. but I think it's important to serve as that canary in the mine, to serve as that conscience, to serve as something that is constantly reminding those in authority and those in power that there is a different way of looking at the world. And so my hope is that we will continue to challenge, we will continue to provoke, we will continue to litigate when necessary, we will continue to try to get legislation when possible. Most importantly, that we have to do it from the grassroots point of view. We have to build up support from down below. We should not make the mistake that the right to choice movement made in 1973 by seeking the right to choice through a judicial decision alone and thinking that the judicial decision, Roe versus Wade, would assure the survival of the right to choice. Courts are not trustworthy. Courts do not, in the end, provide the kind of permanence of an approach that becomes important. The best security is popular support. The struggle for liberty never stays won. We will never win it completely, but I think we have to keep fighting and keep expanding, and that's why I think the support that we're asking for in terms of this and other groups that promote secularism as an alternative to religion is very, very important. So I commend you for your work, and I urge you to keep doing your work, and now I would like...
And so that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm talking about this topic, about the religious right, because I think it's important, and it's not a fun topic necessarily, but it's a good one, and you can actually work to help make a change and for the better. So with that, I'll get into what the actual topic is. And I apologize, I met a few of you in the hallway earlier who said that they were at Skepticon. And at Skepticon, I talked about Santa Claus, which is like, so this might come as a shock, the fact that it's suddenly very serious. And I really wish that I could give really goofy, fun talks all the time. I love doing those. But I can't do that until more people start talking about this stuff, so I don't have to. So I'm hoping that I'll encourage some of you to also get up on stages in the future and cover this for me, so I don't have to do it. This is something that John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, said recently. I think it's important that we understand that what we want to do here is win the war, not just win a battle. And there will be an opportunity sometime in order to win the big war, and we're looking for that opportunity. So you probably already know, but I'll give you a guess. I'll let you think this over for a second. What are the Republicans fighting? What war are they fighting? Actual wars, because there's a few of those. Unemployment? Is it drugs? The war on drugs, very popular in the 80s. The war on Christmas, also hugely popular, just a few months a year. No, it's actually a war on uteruses. In case you're wondering, that's an actual safety recall that was put out a few years ago for a plush uterus that was hazardous to children. Much like my own uterus, I think. So yeah, what they're talking about is a war on women. Actual presidential candidate Michelle Bachmann said once, an arrogant and corrupt Washington elite declared war on marriage, on families, on fertility, and on faith. That's you guys. You are the corrupt Washington elite. You, Melody, C of I, Washington. Yeah. Let's hear it for the corrupt Washington elite. All right. Yeah, notice that fertility is one of the things that we're fighting, as well as faith. These things go hand in hand for the religious right. So what am I talking about when I talk about the religious right? I think it's important to get definitions out there. When I refer to it, I'm talking about a collection of individuals and organizations who are devoted to establishing biblical Christian doctrine using governmental action. And I want to be clear here, not every Christian is in the religious right. Not every conservative is in the religious right. It's actually more of a Venn diagram. If you'll just see the middle there, that's who I'm talking about. We're talking about Christians who actually want their religion inserted into politics. And that's a problem, because a lot of us here, I would imagine, don't really agree with biblical doctrine. So what are we talking about when we talk about biblical doctrine? Well, a few things. One, a lot of you will already be familiar with. Often at these sort of conferences, we talk about creationists and how they attempt to get creationism inserted into the classroom, usually through politics. So that's pretty much been very well covered, and so I'm not going to talk about that. Instead, I'm going to talk about this other bit of biblical doctrine, which is the fact that Jesus is very, very concerned with what you are doing behind closed doors. Or open doors, I guess it depends on your thing. It's all good. In this case, I'm going to be focusing very specifically on the biblical doctrine that states that women are for making babies, and women who have sex should be punished with babies. It's right there in Genesis, if you'll all open your books to page 1, I guess. To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you shall bring forth children. Yet your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. There it all is, all nice and tidy in one verse. Men get to rule us, and women get to have babies, painfully. And so this actually informs an awful lot of what's happening right now on the part of the religious right. So quickly, I'll just go over a couple of the organizations that are a big part of the religious right. One is the Alliance Defense Fund. They are this huge legal council. They're founded by Alan Sears, who wrote this book, The Homosexual Agenda. Did you guys know there was an agenda? Did everybody get the agenda while you were here? Good. Alan Sears is very well known for promoting Pulpit Freedom Sundays, where he encourages preachers to get up at the pulpit and stump for a political candidate, particularly the religious right political candidate, which is illegal because churches get some tax breaks, so they are not allowed to do that. I'm guessing here, but I'm pretty sure that the Alliance Defense Fund is hoping that someone will get caught doing that and a legal case will be brought, and then they can fight it and help set some sort of precedent. Alan Sears is also famous for saying that SpongeBob SquarePants is part of the gay agenda to turn our children gay, which, I can see it. Starting to feel a little bit lesbian just looking at him. Another group is Focus on the Family. You might have heard of them. James Dobson is the founder. There he is, looking all fresh. James Dobson once attacked the Girl Scouts for being a front, and I quote, for humanism and radical feminism. You can just imagine him opening the door with the little Girl Scout there. Peddle your lesbian cookies elsewhere, Jezebel. Neighborhood kids don't go to that house anymore. His wife is the head of the National Day of Prayer Task Force, which is a thing that still exists in 2011. He actually wanted to support political candidates so badly that he founded another organization called Focus on the Family Action with a budget of $10.5 million. And that was specifically to provide information on political candidates. It's supposedly unbiased, but of course isn't. So these are just a couple of the organizations. There's tons of them. I highly recommend you check them out. If you go to Americans United, their website, they do a really good overview of all of these guys. What I want to convey to you is that they're extremely powerful. They actually get, their lobby actually gets stuff done. If you'll recall, earlier this year, our government nearly shut down because of Planned Parenthood funding. The religious right desperately wanted to get rid of all funding for Planned Parenthood as some sort of, to hear them tell it, it's because taxpayer money shouldn't go to abortions. Never mind that taxpayer money doesn't go to any abortions, and 97% of what Planned Parenthood provides is not abortion related. It's other family planning, cancer screenings, actually very crucial things for women's health. But that didn't stop the religious right. What also didn't stop them was the fact that the American public, the majority of them didn't want to see this happen. Polls consistently showed that about 65% of the American public did not want to defund Planned Parenthood. Yet the politicians were listening to this small group. because they have an incredible amount of money and an incredible amount of influence.
Alan Alexander Milne, who some of you might already know as the author of Winnie the Pooh, is also well known for a comment he made regarding the Bible. He said, the Old Testament is responsible for more atheism, agnosticism, disbelief, call it what you will, than any book ever written. It has emptied more churches than all the counteractions of cinema, motor bicycle, and golf course. So today I thought, what better way to remind ourselves just how right he was than look at some of these verses ourselves and see what they say. So let's jump right in and start by gauging just how toxic God can get. Let's take a look at Hosea chapter 13 verses 4 to 9 and also verses 16. But I have been the Lord your God ever since you came out of Egypt. You shall acknowledge no God but me, no Savior except me. I cared for you in the wilderness, in the land of burning heat. When I fed them, they were satisfied. And when they were satisfied, they became proud. Then they forgot me. So I will be like a lion to them. Like a leopard, I will lurk by the path. Like a bear robbed of her cubs, I will attack them and rip them open. Like a lion, I will devour them. A wild animal, I will tear them apart. You are destroyed, Israel, because you are against me, against your helper. Verse 16, the people of Samaria must bear their guilt because they have rebelled against their God. They will fall by the sword, their little ones will be dashed to the ground, their pregnant women ripped open. Now, as you may have noticed, there is a whole lot that's wrong with this entire passage, starting with the threats that don't sound like the all-loving sort, man. Some of these threats would actually make King Joffrey from Game of Thrones envious. But that's not what I'd like us to expound on, if that's okay with you guys. The thing that popped into my mind while reading this passage was an image of those nice guys that ladies are always complaining about. You know, the kind that will treat you like a princess and pamper you in the early days when they're hitting on you. But once they realize that they will not stand a chance, they transform into the biggest assholes to ever exist, and some even go as far as attacking and taking the lives of the ladies that rejected them. Now, religious people can't tell us that God gave us life, so he has the right to take it away whenever he pleases. And you know what, man? Fair enough. My only point is, if you religious people come to us with the few acts of kindness that God performs through the Bible as your proof that God is an all-loving and an all-caring God, you'll have to be a literal fraud and slow as well if you reject our counter-presentation where the Bible portrays God as being just unnecessarily evil because his chosen people did not worship him how he desired. Or am I crazy, guys? Actually, growing up, a phrase that our Sunday school teacher and later on our pastor used to utter repeatedly to us is that you have two sets of parents in the universe. Yahweh being the first and your biological parents being the second. The point I believe they were trying to get across was the same way your parents love you, your biological parents, God loves you 10 times more than that. And the same way your parents punish you for your own good, so does God from time to time. Unfortunately for my preacher and Sunday school teacher, this would be the same principle that resulted in me living organized religion later on. Take the passage above as an example. What kind of parent sets out to utterly destroy their children's lives in the most excruciating ways because simply the child did not reciprocate the parent's love? We do have these kinds of parents here on earth, of course, but whenever we can, we lock them in prisons and throw away the keys. Away. I actually remember the Muslim father that killed his daughter because the daughter started dating a non-believer, and I specifically remember just how sick it made me in my stomach, man, to hear that story. But somehow that's exactly how God reacts throughout the Bible whenever Israelites turn their back on him for even 1 second. But yet, we're supposed to believe that he is not only all-loving, he is all-caring and simultaneously all-powerful, man. Instead of God doing what any loving parent will do, you know, letting your children face the world and hope they learn from their mistakes, No, he actively orchestrated the destruction of his own chosen people multiple times. What about that screams fairness and justice, man? And that's not all, man. The next one is also a really weird threat from our loving creator that left me thinking, what the actual fuck, man? So let's say it. Leviticus chapter 26 verses 27 to 29. If in spite of this you still do not listen to me but continue to be hostile toward me, then in my anger I will be hostile to you, and I myself will punish you for your sins 7 times over. You will eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters. Repeat after me, guys. What the actual fuck, man? Yo. Now, if you've read the Bible, then you know that the Israelites did tend to frustrate God beyond measure repeatedly. Like every other chapter was dedicated to them leaving their faith in God behind and embracing some weird. So I understand God's emotional roller coaster. But why are his traits always so juvenile and perverted, man? He is an all-knowing and all-powerful God. So if he wants to be evil and a little bit creative in his punishments, why doesn't he go for something a little otherworldly, man? Like Freddy Kruegering his way into every person's dream and tormenting them without actually killing them. But instead, he always jumps right off the deep end and threatens them with rape, infanticide, and now apparently cannibalism, man. Now, other than that, I can't help but feel sorry for the chosen people out there, man. Imagine being stuck with a being that sure does do you favors and gives you other people's lands from time to time, but as soon as your attention is grabbed by something on the side, he transforms again into King Joffrey if he had the power of the universe at his disposal. And actually, if you think about it, guys, this is the exact kind of relationship that religious people today expect everyone to have with God. You know, 2 or 3 centuries ago, they simply banned anyone who dared question God at the stake. And today, despite a century of enlightenment, they're still willing to use every humanly possible limitation at their disposal. For example, the judicial system to limit everyone else's freedoms or infringe on other people's expressions, man. It's utterly ridiculous, man. Anyway, so what do you guys think about the arguments laid out in today's video? Kindly let me know what you think in the comment section below. Also, kindly, if you can, smash the like button and subscribe to the channel so the video can reach even more people who might need to hear it. Thanks, guys, and stay safe. Peace.